Changes in life are very, very common, and changes in income tax and GST are even more common. And that's the reason I'm bringing to you a two-part series covering all the amendments that you need to know in DT as well as in GST. Welcome, my name is Saurabh Mutta, and I'm bringing to you the best in the best of tax. This video will help you for May 23 CA Inter students, everything that is to covered in the amendments. So watch this. This is the GST amendment video. There is another part 2, which is the DT amendment video. Watch both of them. Amendments are really important. While we might not like changes, ICAI loves changes. So they focus a lot on what has changed. And these two videos will help you understand everything what has changed. I've used ICAI Material only so that we can basically base our discussion on the ICAI Material, so we don't leave out anything. And every time you want to revise, including one day before the exam, just log on, watch this video, and you'll be done. So let's start with the GST amendments. Here we go. This part right here is a document which has been given by ICAI, and this document basically covers all the amendments. For your sake, I have highlighted this entire sheet. So as you see on the screen, this entire sheet is highlighted, and you need to read only the highlighted part, nothing else. So the good part is only the highlighted part is to be read. Here we go. Let's start. This is the GST amendment, CA Inter May 23. All the best. All right. So first of all, the Finance Act 2021-2022 has been covered here. All the amendments which are applicable for May 23 has been covered here. That's what they've said. Now moving on to the first one. Guys, as you know, if you're working as an employee with someone, then whatever they pay you under an employment contract, your salary or bonus, there is no GST on that. So I'll just be discussing a few things and then we'll read it also. So any contractual payment that your employer gives you, example, he's giving you some extra incentives, he's giving you something extra, which is covered under a contract of employment, then in that there is no GST. Guys, reminding you, there's one schedule called Schedule 3. In that, there is written that in employer-employee, there is no GST. Next. Guys, it's always something sad that some contract is done and there is a breaking of the contract. Example, let's say you go to McDonald's and you eat a burger, and in that burger, unfortunately, or if you like it, then fortunately, there is a cockroach, and you file a case against them and they pay you damages. On that, there is no GST, because honestly, this money was not paid to you. It was not consideration. That means you did not eat the cockroach on the condition that they will pay you money. So these kind of damages, these kind of penalties that are paid, like you breaking a signal and then the Havaldar or the police cop catching you and he taking 500 rupees official fine from you. You did not agree with him that I will break the signal and I'll pay you 500. You were caught, and these kind of penalties, there is no GST. But guys, there is something which is called damages that you pay. Example, you are supposed to pay someone, example, you are supposed to pay electric bike company 1 lakh rupees for the bike. And you had told them that you will pay that today, 11th of February. But you did not pay, so he will charge you interest or late fees or penalties on those, because you have agreed that if I am late, I will pay you penalty. Then in that case, there is consideration, and that is applied. So there are three things. One is liquidated damages. So damages that you pay when you break a contract. One is compensation and one is penalty. Just remember that if there is a consideration, that means you have agreed to do it and they have agreed to bear. Example, if you pay late, they have agreed to take the money late along with interest, and in that case, there is GST. Guys, a very, very common item is when you give a check to someone and the check bounces. You know what means? Bounces basically means you don't have money in your bank account and it bounces. This is called check dishonor. Now, check dishonor again is like a penalty only, and this is also not supply, and there will be no GST. Next, guys, you joined a job, and under the contract, it was said that, listen, you have to work a labor contract. You have to work there for it's called a bond. You have to work in a couple of organizations for 1 year. Example, you join Infosys. Infosys says you have to work there for 1 year at least, and you break that contract, and they forfeit your salary, or you have to pay them again. Guys, all things said into one thing, any payment which is made as per a contract of employment, there is no GST. Next, power. Guys, as you know, electricity is not under GST. When electricity is charged in your electricity bill, if you see, there will be no GST, because they feel electricity is a common man's need, and hence they did not want to make it expensive, so electricity is exempt. But guys, along with electricity, there is a fixed charge that you pay for power. Yes. So there is a certain minimum fixed charge you pay, and above that fixed power charge, there is some additional charge you pay depending on how much power you use. That fixed charge, on that also there is no GST. So I'll just break it up. In my electricity bill, I see electricity charges, fixed charges, variable charges, both no GST. But meter rent, GST. Meter repair, GST. Meter change, GST. Next, Guys, Goa plans, you know, they are so excitedly made, but every time you make a Goa plan, invariably things get cancelled. So imagine you and your friends booked some Goa tickets, some air tickets on Goa Ibibo, Make My Trip, or some Vistara Airways, you went and booked it. Obviously, on the flight tickets, there is GST, you know, because air travel, there is GST. Now, if you cancel, basically that means you don't travel and they charge some cancellation charge. Is that also subject to GST? Guys, ICAI FAQ and the amendments have said that cancellation will depend upon the main ticket. If the main ticket is subject to GST, even cancellation will be subject to GST. So this Goa air ticket will be subject to GST. But a second class non-AC train fare will cancellation will not be. Next, guys, you know, in GST, there are some prohibited items. I'll talk about two things where prohibited items are used. One is if you're a composition scheme dealer, that means if you want to take the composition scheme, if you remember, composition scheme, there is 151% GST that you have to pay to the government. It's a very nice scheme, but that scheme you cannot take if you're supplying prohibited goods. So basically, you should not be manufacturing prohibited goods. In my classes, you learned a shortcut, studying casually eating ice cream, studying income tax online. So ice cream, pan masala, there were 4 products, PATI, pan masala, aerated water, tobacco, and ice cream. These were considered as prohibited goods. Also, you could not be manufacturing them in the composition scheme. Second, in registration chapter, we had seen that prohibited goods are a part of PIGS. If you remember PIGS, the 40 lakh limit, in that prohibited goods you cannot manufacture, you cannot resell, you cannot do anything with prohibited goods. Now the definition of prohibited goods has expanded. So only one thing I want to add there, that if there are any bricks, basically when you construct a house, there are bricks, roofing tiles, etc., bricks made of different earthen materials, all those have also been introduced in prohibited goods, have been introduced in prohibited goods. All right, moving ahead, one more exemption, guys. Very interesting. Example, if I have a house and I give it on rent, let's say I have an extra house and I give it on rent for residential purposes, there was no GST on it, which is great because they felt that this is a personal residential purpose. But of course, now is a time of work from home. Everyone is working from home. So they feel that now residential premises are rented out. And sometimes people also work from there. So they have made a rule that if you are renting out a residential premises, so this is renting of residential premises, and you're giving it to a registered person. So the person who is taking it is a registered person, registered already under GST. Then on this, there will be GST. So earlier it was exempted. Now also it's exempted for unregistered persons. But if it's registered persons, it is basically under GST. And because they're already registered, the government says, why don't these guys only pay it under RCM? So two changes. One is that renting of residential property. This could be very important in your exam. So they could say that Mr. A is renting a residential property. If you're renting it to a registered person, is there GST? Yes. But who's supposed to pay? Not you, not the person who's renting, not the owner of the property, but the person who's receiving it. That guy has to pay it under RCM. So two changes there as well. Let's start reading. We'll keep moving ahead. We'll discuss a few and we'll read a few. Perquisites provided in terms of contractual agreement. Anything provided to you in contractual agreement is not part of GST. There is no supply. GST applicability on liquidated damages, compensation penalty. We've already discussed that. You can always read this. But guys, this is the same. If you agreed, example, you've said that if someone pays you late, they have to pay late fees. That is agreed, and in that case, there is GST. Otherwise, like fines, penalties, etc., charged by the government when you break a signal, break a law, on that there is no GST. So all this is that only. Forfeiture of salary or payment of bond amount in the event of employee leaving the employment before the minimum agreed period. I said this also. That this is also not subject to GST. Late payment fee or charge is if the main good or the main expense is subject to GST, this will also be subject to GST. Fixed charges for power, we've already discussed it. It is not because it's part of power. Cancellation charges, if the main ticket is cancellation subject to GST, even cancellation will be subject to GST. Keep looking at the screen. Next, moving ahead, manufacture of fly ash bricks of fossil earthen and roofing tiles are ineligible. Basically, they are part of prohibited goods. It comes here also in composition scheme. It comes ahead also in registration chapter. Basically, these 3 things or these 4 things, and I have to summarize it. I also call it bricks and tiles. They've been part of prohibited goods now. Next, guys, this is something that we discussed. Very important here. Service by way of renting residential dwelling to a registered person will be subject to GST and it will be under RCM. So again, guys, it will come again in exemptions and it is under RCM. Moving on. All right, so now discuss a few more. Let's discuss a few more and we'll read a few more. That's how we'll move ahead. Every time you want to do amendment, just watch this video before the exam. You'll remember all of it. All right. Guys, when you've gone to the post office, I don't remember the last time I went to a post office, but if you go to a post office, you feel that everyone there is very sleepy because nowadays everyone uses courier services. Post offices have become RIP. So this is the shortcut. Registered post, if you send it by something by registered post, if you send an inland letter, if you send a post, old post, or you send a book post, then these four are exempt from GST. Only these four, yes. So if I go to the post office and make a speed post, then that is subject to GST. That is taxable. Only these four, RIPB, registered post. Registered post basically means they register it. So it's more surety of reaching who gets it. Inland letter, post, that not traditional post, and book post. When you send a small book by book post, all these four are exempt. Everything else, example, speed post, etc., are taxable. Next, let's say you booked a contract carriage. Do you remember what is a contract carriage? I want to go for a small weekend trip, so I book a Innova. That's a contract carriage. Contract basically means I have contracted. The carriage means a vehicle, and there is stage carriage like a bus. So these two, contract carriage and stage carriage, basically, there are conditions. For contract carriage, there are two conditions because two C's, and for stage carriage, there is one condition for GST. So a contract carriage will be subject to GST only if it's AC or only if it's for tourism. And a stage carriage will be subject to GST only if it is AC. This is what we already know. Now let's see what's the change. The change is very simple. If I book a contract carriage or I book a stage carriage through basically an online platform like Uber, I use Uber to book the Innova, then in that case, even if it's non-AC, even if it's not for tourism, it will be subject to GST because it almost becomes like a radio taxi. Next, very important change. We'll read later, but first we'll discuss very, very important change. Guys, I'm talking about goods transport. Again, something that can come in the exam. Very important change. In case of goods transport example, I have some laptops. I want to transfer them from Mumbai to Delhi. I am, let's say, HP and I want to transfer some laptops. So this comes in goods transport. In goods transport, I'm talking about the road transport and the rail transport. In rail transport, if you remember the shortcut, rail Dr. Nam. Basically, if I'm transporting railway equipment, defense, relief, newspapers, agricultural material, organic manure, milk, etc., then this was exempt, if you remember. Now the government has made a change. They said railway equipment transport will be subject to GST. Yes, you heard it right. That's the change. So railway equipment is now out of the shortcut. So it's only Dr. Nam. And in case of road transport by GTA, Goods Transport Agency, it was basically LL Dr. Nam. What was LL Dr. Nam? Of course, you already know what is Dr. Nam. LL basically was low value, where the value of one consignment is up to 750, or the value of all the consignments in a particular vehicle is up to 1500. That complicated thing has also been removed. So, guys, no more 750 and 1500 exemption there. Next, we go to agricultural produce, guys. Guys, in India, farmers are linked both by DT and by GST. And if you farm something and you sell it, then there is no GST. But guys, there are secondary items like tobacco, all those items, although they are basically, they have done some protection. So let's take the example, you don't grow jaggery, you grow sugar cane. Out of sugar cane, you make jaggery. So jaggery is basically not an agricultural produce and it is subject to GST. I hope you know that. Now, there was a provision which says that although it is subject to GST, the warehousing of agricultural, the warehousing of products like jaggery, etc., was exempt. I'm talking about only warehousing part. Now, the warehousing of things like jaggery, although it is not an agricultural produce, was exempted earlier, but now no more. So now they've said that only few things like cereals, like pulses, fruits and vegetables, their warehousing will be exempt. Otherwise, everything will be taxable. Guys, remember, the government wants more and more tax and hence they've done this. Also earlier, if you had an agricultural warehouse, example, a warehouse where agricultural produce is stored, the fumigation basically means to keeping it out of, preventing it from pests and rodents. The fumigation service was not subject to GST. Now that also welcome to GST. All right, so reading it here, these are all the inland post service, etc., which we just discussed. A residential dwelling that rented to a registered person subject to GST. This one is item B and C, where it is contract carriage and stage carriage. All the booked through e-commerce operators will be subject to GST. Then railway equipment transport has been removed. And then LL, that 1500, 750 has also been removed. I've only highlighted the important part, so you save a lot of time. Services where storage and warehousing of cereals, pulses, fruits and vegetables is still not subject to GST, but other things like nuts, spices, copra, sugarcane, jaggery, raw vegetable, fibers, cotton, flax, jute, indigo, unmanufactured tobacco, betel leaves, tendu leaves, coffee and tea. All this is now subject to GST. Have a look, don't by heart it. Just one day before the exam, watch this video and you'll be good to go. And fumigation is also here. What about the others? The others are not done. There's no change. It's just continuing from what it was before. So don't worry. What has been removed is the change. So fumigation of a warehouse or agricultural produce is now subject to GST. Great. Let's now move ahead. Guys, very, very sad to say the next thing. Hospitalization, healthcare services was earlier exempt from GST, but now the government is getting greedy there also, which I am not enjoying. So they said if you're hospitalized, we will charge you GST, but only on one thing. If your room rent is more than 5,000, example, from all sides of your room, you can see like great view, and your room rent is 6,000 rupees, and that there will be GST. If the room rent is more than 5,000, there will be GST. Example, 6,000, 5,500, there will be GST. 4,000, no GST. But this, the government says not in ICU. No, don't worry. So if you're admitted in ICU and it's 6,000, don't worry. So only general beds without ICU, etc. Those beds, if it's more than 5,000, there will be GST. One. Next, also in hospitals, when they used to get services of, those medical waste, biomedical waste treatment, earlier that used to be exempt. Now, unfortunately, that is taxable. So healthcare services, two things are now. National permits are now exempt. So if you get a national permit, example, a bus has a national permit, that has been exempt. Something that is a very big change. So I'm just summarizing the changes here. For hospital, if the room rent is more than 5,000, then it is taxable. Another change, national permits are exempt. So I'm just writing here, national permits are exempt. Next, very, very important change, guys, hotels. Whether earlier, any hotel which was charging you up to 1,000 rupees, example, if you go to a small hotel and they charge you 900 rupees, it used to be earlier exempt. Now the government has gotten greedy. They said if you're a hotel, whether it's 300 rupees, 1,000 rupees, 2,000, there will be GST. Next is India has a lot of very big institutions like RBI, like SEBI, like IRDA. All these institutions, when they used to provide services earlier, they used to be exempt, but not anymore. The government has gotten greedy here as well. They said tax, 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 show me the money. And one more thing, food sampling. Example, if I start some new health food business and I have to get my food sample tested, that testing earlier was exempt. Now it is come under tax. So but I think the hotel one is very important, where any room, whether it's 500 rupees, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, it will be subject to GST. And this hospital thing also, but remember this more than 5,000 is not subject to GST if these rooms are ICU rooms. All right, now comes a very small but slightly tricky thing which I want to discuss. Let's say you are fed up after your exams, you tell your parents, mom, dad, let's go for a holiday, and they plan a holiday which is partly in India and partly abroad. Example, let's say 3 days in Delhi and then 3 days in Nepal. That's your holiday. Now, in that case, the government has come up with a very amazing exemption. They say whatever days is calculated, you have to proportionately calculate. Example, let's say you paid 2 lakh rupees for the holiday. Then how many days in India, how many days abroad? Let's say it's a 10-day trip, 4 days in India, 6 days abroad. So you have to proportionately do this. Or rupees 50,000, whichever is less will be considered as exempt and taxable. I'll read it out to you, but first let's do this. This one, we'll read some sums also on it. But right now I'm talking about the ICU rooms, etc. Even if it's more than 5,000, no GST, but otherwise 5,000 plus, there will be GST. This is something that you already knew. Next, Department of Post, this you already know, guys. Inland letter, ordinary post, book post, these will be exempt. Tour operator, very important. I'm reading it out because very, very important. Tour operator services, which is performed partly in India and partly outside India, supplied by a tour operator to a foreign tourist to the extent of the value of tour operator services which is performed outside India. Example, you're a foreign tourist and you've taken the holiday service of 10 days, let's say 5 days in Delhi, 5 days in Nepal, then they say that whatever is outside India will be considered as exempt. Obviously, the government can't charge the foreign tourists also outside, and the service is also given outside India. But how do you calculate that? So they say you calculate proportionately based on number of days. I'll do some sums also, or 50% of the total consideration, whichever is less. I said 50,000 by mistake, so it's 50%. So you have to calculate that whichever is less will be considered as an exemption. And while calculating the number of days, if you stayed in a place for more than 12 hours, it will be considered full day, and less than 12 hours, it will be considered half day. So, and a foreign tourist is someone who comes to India, who is not a resident in India, but who comes to India for visiting, but for a maximum period of 6 months in a year. Let's see, let's take an example. You're a foreign tourist and you've taken services 3 days in India, 2 days in Nepal. So basically, consideration is 1 lakh rupees. Now, out of 1 lakh, the one which is abroad is 2 by 5. So 2 by 5 is basically 20,000. So it is 40,000 rupees here, or 50% of the total consideration, that is 50,000, whichever is less. So your 40,000 is less. This will be exempt. Let's take another one. 2 days in India, 3 nights in Nepal for 1 lakh. So 1 lakh into 3 nights in Nepal this time. So it's 60,000 or 50,000, whichever is less. So 50,000 will be exempt. 2.5 days in India and 3 days in Nepal. So now this 1 lakh will be divided by 3 into divided by 5.5. So whatever is the number, that of 50,000, whichever is less, will be exempt. So just repeating, has to be a foreign tourist. The foreign holiday which is outside India, that will considered as exemption. That or 50% of the value of supply, whichever is less. Perfect. So this is national permit. Guest houses, 1,000 rupees has been removed. RBI, IRDA now are under tax, GST, SEBI. This all we had known. Food sampling is here. GST and fumigation we already discussed. That's all repeated. So yes. Now let's move ahead to a few more before we read. So let's stop here and let's move ahead. Guys, GST amendments you don't need to buy hard. You just need to be aware. So in the exam, if there is food sampling, you need to know. If in the exam there is hotel, you just need to know. You don't need to buy hard everything. All right, next guys. I'm a Jain and I don't like animal slaughtering. You should love animals, but you should keep them alive. That's what my belief is. Of course, people have different beliefs. But earlier, animal slaughtering used to be exempt. So animal slaughtering, that service used to be exempt. Now they made it possible. So that is one. Second, guys, there is a technology called stem cell therapy. When you are born, your stem cells are removed so that whenever later in life you are unwell, they can be used to treat you. This stem cell therapy earlier used to be exempt. Now it is. I've already discussed biomedical waste. Biomedical waste treatment earlier used to be exempt. Now it is taxable. So these three are taxable. Let's talk about the exempt thing. Guys, Anganwadis, where small toddlers are kept while the mothers can go to work. Anganwadi is basically an education institution only because children are kept there, they are taught there, etc. Now, those Anganwadis, they also provide food. Is that also exempt? Yes, the government said that also thankfully is exempt. I want to talk about something called road construction. Guys, I'm very surprised because they have discussed road construction, which is always under GST. So if I am L&T and I'm providing road construction services, obviously there will be tax. Next, guys, I am the state government and one of my companies MTNL, or I'm the central government, and one of my companies MTNL wants a loan, but no bank is ready to provide MTNL a loan. So I tell the bank that listen, it's my guarantee, MTNL will pay you back. And for that, giving that guarantee, I charge MTNL, etc., a certain fee. Example, you're not getting a loan. So your father tells the bank that, listen, bank, don't worry, I'm giving you a guarantee, my son will repay. And for that guarantee, they charge you a small fee. Who? Your father charges you a small fee. Yes. So the government charges a small fee to the bank, and that guaranteeing services, I'm just writing guaranteeing loans to PSUs, that service is thankfully exempt. But anyways, a shorter way to remember it is this is provided by the government and hence they want to keep it exempt. Now guys, a lot of private coaching. Of course, as you know, private coaching for education is taxable. If you take CA classes, there will be tax. But they say a lot of private coaching run government schemes. Example, a government has come up with a scheme and the private coaching is helping to run them. Then, of course, because it's a government scheme, it is exempt. And you should know, guys, if you like to go on drives, long drives, and there are tolls on the highway, those tolls are also exempt. So just recapping, tolls, private coaching, giving government education, guaranteeing loans to PSUs, and food and Anganwadis are exempt. Whereas biomedical waste, road construction, animal slaughtering, and stem cell therapy, these are now taxable. So just checking, slaughtering of animals, cord blood banks, stem cell therapy, biomedical waste treatment. These are now become taxable. GST on supply of food in Anganwadis, basically that is not subject to GST. Construction of road was always subject to GST. I don't know why they've put this here. Services supplied by central state government to the undertaking of PSU by way of guaranteeing loans is exempt. Coaching classes, but running NGOs and running central sector schemes, those will be exempt from GST. And overloading charges, basically those toll charges that you pay, including overloading charges or the FASTag charges, are all exempt. So please go on long drives, no problem. You'll pay, of course, tolls, but you'll not pay GST on that. All right. Now moving ahead. How much have we? We've almost finished like 70%. DT amendments, guys, are very, very few. So GST amendments are more. But don't worry, you watch this video once, you watch it again, and you'll be good to go. So watch it, 70% is already done. All right, so moving ahead to the next few ones, here we go. Where we had done till. All right, guys, the next few ones, some things that we've already done. Renting of vehicles. Guys, if you have a vehicle and you want to give it out, is that GST on that? Yes, there is GST, but there are some exceptions. First, if I'm renting out a vehicle which is more than 12 passengers, basically means like a bus or a minibus, to a state transport undertaking, then congratulations, I will not charge any GST on this. This is exempt. And another thing, if I'm giving it to the local authority, more than 12 passengers, same thing, but local authorities like electric vehicles, so this vehicle should be electric. Then again on that also there is an exemption. So this one is basically renting a vehicle, just clarifying that. Guys, you are moving to Canada or to some foreign country and you want a migration certificate from your college. So that migration certificate is also part of your education only services, and that one is also exempt. Next, you've dug out some metals, minerals, etc., transporting into the factory. Will that be taxable? Of course, that is taxable, guys. There is no GST. There is no exemption on that. You see a lot of news channels, etc., have guest anchors. Example, if as a budget, they call some sailors and they pay them honorarium. That honorarium is also taxable, guys. Don't worry. Taxable, everything is taxable. Only the ones which is exempt you have to focus on. Next, something which is very, very important, guys. Some people do not get natural pregnancies because of complications. So a lot of people get late, a lot of people are stressed, so they can't conceive. So we have something called IVF. Now, IVF is basically a medical treatment to get pregnant, and hence the government says there are healthcare services definitely, and hence it will be exempt. Now, as you know, GST, immovable property on that is not applicable. Example, if I sell my house which I'm staying in or my office which I'm right now taking the lecture from, in that case, there will be no GST. But leveling of land, will that be subject to GST? Think about it. It's a service. So obviously it will be taxable. Next, very, very important and slightly different also. I have taken a contract carriage on rent. Example, I'm a company called Wipro and I have taken a bus on rent. Of course, bus should be a stage carriage, but no, it's my personal bus which is used to drop my employees and get them back. That contract carriage, is it exempt or taxable? First, if it's AC or if it's for tourism purpose, you know it's taxable. But what if this is non-AC? Then the government says, how do we know whether it's being used for tourism purpose or not? So it has to have a fixed route. If it has a fixed route, then it will be exempt. So repeating, a contract carriage, example, a bus taken by Wipro to drop their employees in banks. If they have a fixed route means it's only during morning and evenings going to pick them and drop them up, then it will be exempt. There will be no GST on that. Let's read these. Renting of vehicles to state transport undertakings and local authorities. Remember, both should be more than 12 passengers, and for local authorities, it should be electric vehicles, then it should be exempt. GST on migration certificate, etc., is all exempt. This is something that is exempt. Remember the exempt ones, the others are all taxable. GST on transport of minerals, of course, that is taxable. GST on honorarium paid to guest anchors. Guest anchors also will be subject to GST. Clarification on IVF is a health treatment and hence it is exempt. Sale of land after leveling. See, leveling there is GST, but sale of land is always outside of GST. Next, hiring of vehicles for transportation of the employees to and from work is contract carriage. Of course, it should be non-AC and it should have a fixed route. All right. Moving ahead now, just last two slides left and then we are done with this, guys. So moving now to the next aspect. Here the next aspect talks about ferry. Guys, as you know, water transport. the government says that in India, water transport, no one does water transport. I don't remember the last time I went on a ship somewhere in India. So they said water transport is exempt unless it's for tourism. Example, if I'm going from Mumbai to Goa for a nice cruise holiday, then that is taxable. Now, what about ferries which are private? Example, in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, there are many small islands and there are private ferries which go from one island to the other. Again, the same thing, they are exempt unless it's for tourism. All right, so there goes the exemption chapter. It was a big chapter, but finally it's out. Now let's do more. Guys, there was a rule called Rule 36. Tell you a little about the rule. If I have purchased some batteries from battery supply company, obviously on this purchase, I want credit of the GST that I have paid. But the credit will be available only when battery supply company uploads the return in GSTR1. This is something that you have. Now the deal is, what if battery supply company does not upload the invoice? Then earlier I used to get a certain percentage, and that was rule 36.4, which now has been completely removed. So if battery supply company does not upload the invoice, then electric bike company, sorry, you will not be able to take any credit, unfortunately. Guys, just like your medicines, that cake in your fridge, that pastry in your fridge, and chocolates in your fridge have an expiry. Same thing, even GST, taking it to the credit ledger has an expiry. Not using it, using you can use anytime, but taking it. So example, today that is 11th of February, if I purchase something and I had to take credit on it, but I have not taken for some reason, invoice problem, etc., etc. Can I claim it later on? Yes, but there's a time limit. Not this year, not till 31st March. After that, the earlier time limit was basically, October, September, October. I'll not talk about the earlier one, but now they said that this deadline is earlier of 30th November. Is this fixed? Yes. Or the annual return filing date, whichever is earlier. So if on 11th Feb I forget to take this, then I can take it till either 30th November or annual return filing date, whichever is earlier. Annual return is supposed to be filed by the 31st December. So either then or 30th November. So example, if I file my return on 5th June, then 5th June becomes my deadline. If you file on 5th December, then 30th November becomes my deadline, because whichever is earlier. Remember, this same applies even for debit notes, credit notes, everything. This is basically the time limit. Now, guys, when can a debit note be issued? Guys, debit note is issued whenever something has been forgotten. Example, I purchased 10 electric bikes, but the invoice showed only 50 bikes. So then debit. If you know, there is something called QTV, quantity tax value. Whenever it is low, to increase it, they issue a debit note. I'm not going into reasons of issuing debit note, but I'm just talking about debit notes life cycle. Now, debit notes also will give you GST credit, and that also has an expiry. So they say the debit note, its expiry, its own expiry. That means its expiry is not connected with the main invoice expiry. The main invoice may be given last year, but whenever the debit note is issued, let's say the main invoice is issued today in Feb, and the debit note is issued in May, then it will have next to next year deadline. Basically, will have its right. Battery supply company uploads the invoice, the next one will be uploaded and will be reflected in a document called GSTR2B. GSTR2B is basically just a auto-generated statement of whatever invoices have been uploaded. All right, next. Guys, cancellation of registration. Very dangerous. You've taken registration, which unfortunately is now getting cancelled, and there can be two reasons of not filing return. So they say if you're a composition scheme dealer, guys, if you remember composition scheme dealer, life was very simple. They have to pay the GST 151% every quarter, but they have to file the return once at the end of the year, 30th April. Now, if you don't file the return for 3 months, so the April deadline is over, 3 months are done, and still you've not filed a return, then they can cancel your registration. And for regular scheme dealers, we will discuss soon. So this is soon, but this is 3 months after that stated date. Let's read, guys. Private ferry, if it's for non-tourism purposes, will be exempt. Rule 36.4 has now been removed. Don't worry about what all is there. I'm just telling you, and just remember those things. The time limit is 30th November, or annual return filing date, whichever is earlier. Date of issuance of debit note to determine the relevant financial year for its own expiry. You can read this illustration, but don't read too much into it. This is very simple. This I have not highlighted anything because it's not important. Everything that I have not highlighted, you can comfortably skip, guys. Don't worry about it. Then there is GSTR2B. which is now basically the form where all the people whom you bought from, when they upload invoices, it will be auto-generated into this. All this extra information is not needed. Registration. Guys, again, they said that 40 lakh limit, pigs limit will only not apply to bricks, etc. because these are prohibited goods. Yes, registration is liable to be cancelled for a composition taxpayer fails to furnish a return for a financial year beyond 3 months from the due date. So, and for regular person, it will be as prescribed. So, we'll discuss it ahead. Perfect. Now, let's see what is ahead. Very few things remaining. Guys, you're a regular scheme dealer. That means not under the composition scheme. And in that, if you file your returns quarterly, you know there is now a quarterly system. For people whose turnover is up to 5 crores, they can file their returns quarterly. Then in that case, if you've missed 2 quarters, then they can reason to cancel your registration. And if it's monthly, if you file your returns monthly, and if you've not filed it for 6 months, basically even 2 quarters or 6 months only. So either 2 quarters or 6 months, then there can be reason to cancel your registration. Next, guys, now everything is going electronic, including GST invoices. That's called invoicing. You've discussed it in class. You also realize it probably. E-invoicing is basically nothing, but you have to generate an invoice, upload it on a portal, and the entire invoice is online. So it's more safe, it's more secure, and it's more easy to avoid errors. It's more easy to check those invoices, etc. Now, those invoices are basically B2B, only for B2B supplies, and it is for everyone whose turnover has been more than 10 crores in any year since 1718, that is the start of GST. Earlier, this limit used to be 500 crores, then 100, then 20, and now it is 10. So 10 crores is the limit. So if an entity has a turnover of more than 10 crore in any year since the start, then in that case, they will be basically subject to e-invoicing only for B2B supplies though. Next, there is something called QR code. You all know QR code, and then dynamic QR code is applicable for anyone whose turnover has been more than, this is basically 500 crores. So there's no change in this, honestly. Only this e-invoicing 10 crore has the change. And yes, one more thing, guys, I'm Electric Bike Company. I have one entity in, let's say, one state, Maharashtra, and one entity in Karnataka. I will have 2 registrations, and these 2 entities will be called deemed distinct persons. Now, in my cash ledger, can I transfer money from this cash ledger to this? Yes, you can transfer it between deemed distinct persons also. And you can use UPI and IMPS also, guys, to make payments in the cash ledger. So that's about it. Let's read this. Guys, I'm linking this document also to the same video, so you can download the document and you can also read it. I would suggest only read the important part that is highlighted. This is automatic revocation. So if you have not filed your return, it will automatically get revoked, your cancellation. This is how many months, 2 quarters and 6 months. All of that I have discussed. So do not worry about anything. Whichever is not highlighted, see, a lot of portion here is not highlighted because that's not important. And everything that has been highlighted, I have already covered. So do not hesitate. Do not worry about the size of this amendment booklet. But ICAI tries to give a lot more when you're discussing their amendments. So do not worry at all. Any questions, any doubts, you can always feel free to reach out to me. You already have my WhatsApp hotline number where you can reach out for any doubts. Watch the DT GST amendment before the exams as well. All the best, do well, and see you soon in the second part of the video, or actually the first part, which is the DT amendment. Watch that as well.